And I'm going to hand it over to Moore and Aaron to introduce themselves.
Cool. Wow, we're getting a lot of crazy pull. Should I go? Should I start?
Yeah, go for it.
Well, I know you mentioned to everybody if this is your first Sales Hacker event, then you're welcome. And I was like, I'm first Sales Hacker event. Alrighty, let me share my screen. Well, before I do, actually, I'll introduce myself and then I'll kick it off to Aaron. Then I'll share my screen. So for those of you that don't know me, I launched my company a year ago called FTTC, from demo to close. Prior to that, I was a three-time VP of sales for early stage startups, helped them triple ARR in 12 months. I did that for two companies. And I was talking to Aaron before this, but I didn't have any formal sales training. Actually, my first job out of college was a sales job. And I quit the first day because I was scared of sales. And I just took the job because I feel like I needed to have a job. And then I had like sales PTSD for 2-3 years, and then I got into sales, and then I got into tech. So that's what I do now. FTDC, it's a sales training and coaching business where I coach AEs how to close more demos and close more deals and move them down the pipeline. Yeah, that's about it. And you have my LinkedIn. Aaron, off to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Moore. I definitely had a fear of sales moment too, so we have that in common. I think it's very normal for everyone to panic and realize, I think this is one of the hardest jobs in the world, if I do say so myself. But I started my sales career early on in life, always had an entrepreneurial bone in my body and started to do lots of things with leadership. At the end of my college career, went into event sales for a while, fed my creative brain a little bit with that, and then realized tech was where it was at. So I joined DocuSign back in 2017, was a top performer for them for a couple of years, made my way down to San Diego, joined a startup here that was selling nonprofit fundraising software. I led a pipeline generation team for them for a couple of years. And now I'm at Outreach back as an individual contributor and doing really well here. So I'm excited to share what I've learned in my journey through demoing, building rapport, building good champions. We have a lot to talk about today.
Cool. I think I shared the results for the poll. What does everyone throw? But just for context, we have a good chunk of AEs, 46% AEs, and then 43% leaders, like manager leaders. That's interesting, and 11% SDRs. Alrighty, I will share my screen. Give me a thumbs. Aaron, do you see my screen? Or put a 1 if you see my screen in the chat. All right, cool. So we're going to talk about 4 main things. How to be trusted within the first 5 minutes of the demo. It is actually very possible to do that. The goal also is to get prospects to like want to use your product, not you wanting them to want your product. So we'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about how to keep the demo very engaging. So number 1, they're selling themselves on the demo. They're selling you on why your product works for them. And then 2, how to get them engaged at the demo with multiple attendees and stakeholders on the call. I'm just going to put the chat to the side real quick. And like Savannah said, if you have questions, feel free to. I like to keep this really interactive. If you've ever been on any webinars with me, I'll probably call people out in a good way. Like I'll call on somebody, and then I watch the chat. So be very active. Don't be shy. So we'll start off with this: how to build trust within the first 5 minutes of the demo. There are 8 steps that I look back when I was VP of sales, and then when I was an AE, and then now when I train AEs. And the worst AE was closing 50% of all the demos they gave, and I noticed it was something consistent across the board. The first thing is, and for a lot of people that will see that number 1, turn on the webcam. Some of you will be like, turn on webcam? Obviously, dumbass. Like, obviously the webcam should be turned on, but I was actually, last week I did 5 different demos with 5 different SaaS companies, and 4 out of 5 didn't have their webcam on initially. I'm talking about like the discovery. We'll talk about this, whether you're doing discovery demo, but they didn't have their webcam on discovery and on the demos. And what I realized was when I then turned on mine, they turned on theirs. So I was taking the lead on that. The first thing I'd recommend is don't wait for the prospect to turn on their webcam on. Instead, have yours already on when it starts. And that will prompt them to turn on theirs. I would even, if you're having trouble even getting the prospect turning on the webcam, even if you do that in the beginning, I would recommend in your like email before the demo, you should be sending them an agenda of what you'll cover on the demo. In that agenda email, have like a PS. Hey, by the way, I'm going to keep my webcam on. I always like to put a face to the name, if that's okay with you. And that's just a little prompt right there. But keep it on, and that's a quick way to build trust with a prospect, because you want to know who you're talking to. You want to put a face to the name. And there's something that back in the day before SaaS was this whole thing, and the whole tech industry came along, people did demos in person, face to face. And so there are still certain buyers out there, buyer persona. If you're selling to maybe cybersecurity, you're selling to a more antiquated industry, like for example, property management software, whatever it is. A lot of those buyers are old school, and they prefer the old school way of doing business, which is face to face, handshakes, smiles. So that's the first thing.
And I would even venture to take that a step further too. I think one of the things I learned early through leadership experiences is kind of a funny phrase, but it always sticks with you. And that's the energy that you bring. Everyone's going to come in a little bit lower. So you noticed today on the webinar that when you came in, we had music playing, we had our cameras on, we were smiling, we were using the chat. Whatever level you want your prospect or customer to come in at, you need to come in just a step above, because they're going to follow your lead. Now, there's a level of professionalism to this, right? You don't want to take things a little too comical and, go too far left, but you want to make sure that if you want to bring positive, uplifting energy of a bunch of people on the call, you need to be bringing that first and foremost. And I think that's a really good way to set the tone.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting though. Like, what happens? I'm curious what you do, Aaron. What happens when you start a demo and your energy is like, you're prepped like high energy, and then the person that's joining is like low energy? They almost are. They don't want to be there. Almost, it seems like the vibe. What do you do?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, one of the most important things is that great salespeople are authentic. And I think that there's a level of self-reflection you need to do, and you need to realize what your strengths are before you go into anything, right? Most of us have a team of people, whether it's managers or sales leaders or SEs that are there to help us and support us. So if you can, before this all starts, do some self-reflection and realize, hey, maybe I'm the energy person and I'm the hype woman and I'm really good at that. Or maybe that's not even my style. I'm the technical thinker. I am somebody who thinks with numbers and I don't want to do the woo-woo, everybody's excited. Whatever it is, play to your strength, because you have people that can kind of fill in the gaps for you on your team. So don't be someone you're not. I want to be very clear about that. If you're not the person that wants to come in high energy, it'll come off as fake. So just make sure you're authentic. But I think if you are someone like me who is high energy and someone comes in and is not super energetic, isn't matching your energy, it's important to mirror what they're bringing to the table. So, you don't want to come down all the way down to the bottom level and be an Eeyore in that situation, but you need to kind of meet them in the middle. Because if you spend an hour with somebody and you're way too much and they're not enough, it's really going to be ships passing. So as the leader of the call and as the sales rep who's running the call, I think you need to try your best to match energy that's given to you. But I think a lot of times humor helps. So if you say something funny or you mention something, you try to build some rapport with them, that always helps. I think people they have a long day, and this should be a bright spot of their day. They should not be rolling their eyes that they have to watch a demo from your product. They should be excited and want to learn how this is going to help them. So hugely important to just make sure you're actually meeting people where they're at with their energy levels.
Yeah, great points. Something that I've I've done in the past that I think was helpful. If I were talking to like a VP of marketing or some executive level, and this is more if I was in the office, but you can probably do this obviously remote. But I would have maybe like my VP or someone else on the team that I think the prospect would resonate with, just jump on camera for a quick second to say hello. I mean, I've done this. I did a demo last week with I don't sell software, I sell services, but it was like a demo of what I do. And my son he's 3 years old. He was like walking right near me. So I told the prospect, I'm like, I have a very special guest. And I put up my son right there. I'm like, sorry, he's just next to me. And that immediately just like broke the ice. So you can do that too. So webcam just works for you, and you can leverage other folks around you.
Definitely. Right. I think one last comment there, I will just say, 4 years ago, I went through a chorus training, and I will never forget the CSM who did our training. I was on with her once a week for my whole team for months on end. Her name was Marielle. She was incredible. And she always had a new background. She always had new music. She had new questions for people. It was fresh. So also keep that in mind. If you're doing multiple demos for a certain company, keep it fresh. Don't do the same thing over and over again, because that's where you're going to start to get people to glaze over. Try to mix it up a little bit, whether it's, the background you have, the questions you ask, the energy you bring, that always helps.
Yeah, absolutely. Out of curiosity, actually, can you guys put a 1 in the chat if you turn on your webcams automatically, and a 2 if you don't? I'm just curious to see. Awesome.
Nice.
Yeah, I think someone made a comment like, no webcam? Like, yeah, like this is, people do it still. By the way, when you do turn on your webcam, I know like there's a lot of like I go to work casually, I'll wear a t-shirt now, like a zip up, but I have a particular AE that I know that was doing demos and they were wearing like an incredible t-shirt and they were talking to like a CEO. I think you should just adjust the way you dress to the demos depending on who you're talking to. Obviously, you don't have to put a tuxedo or a suit and tie, but just look a little bit more presentable, especially if you're selling a relatively expensive product. You want to look the part.
Patrick asked a great question in the chat about, engaging some of the folks that are on the call and not being a dancing dog, as he called it. And we're going to cover that. And a lot of that comes down to questions you asked, Patrick. So if we don't get to that in the next slide, ask again so that we can make sure we cover that for you.
Yeah. What about background? Someone just asked another question. What about background? What you'd have in the background, I think, blur it. I like to have it blur. If I unblur the background right now, you'll see just a bunch of diapers behind me. So I prefer to blur it. There are, I may buy this, but there are green screens that it's just built out for your chair and you can strap it behind your chair and you have a green screen and you can put your company logo and information there. You could do that. That'd be interesting because a lot of typical green screens are huge.
I'm of the opposite mindset, and I actually just had this conversation with my sales manager in our one-on-one today. I always keep my background available to see, because I think sometimes when there's things to comment on in someone's background, that's an easy way to build rapport. So if you have a wall with something clean you can have behind you, I'd encourage you to do that just so that there's some easy talking points for you. But also with Zoom, you can use just an uploaded background if you want to have, the Caribbean or whatever you feel like having behind you. You can always upload that on Zoom too.
That's a big one, by the way, having the unblurred so you can actually see the background, which I'll talk about because that's where you can build rapport on. But second thing, so we talked about the webcam. Second thing is doing the time check. I don't see this happen that much. I mean, maybe just my experience, but by doing it, when you get on a call, whether discovery, demo, follow, whatever it is, just ask the prospect, just say this, like, hey, I see that we have, this meeting blocked off until 4 p.m. Do you have a hard stop at that time? That's all. That's really all you're doing. Because if you don't ask this, number one, maybe the prospect does have a hard stop, or maybe they have to actually end sooner. And what happens is you're in your demo, you're in your flow, you haven't even covered like next steps in onboarding. And then the prospect says, you know what? Can we just like wrap it up? I really got to run to another meeting. And then you're flying through, no next steps. You're like, what the hell? And so you want to do a time check in the beginning for the preparation reason, but also to build trust, because you're showing respect for your prospect's time and you're showing respect for just your time as well. And that's how you build trust. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, Richard made a great comment in the chat as far as if somebody's late, that's an excellent time to just validate the time, because I think that just sets everybody's expectation of, we have a lot to cover. I'm going to buzz through it. Feel free to interrupt me, but I want to make sure we get the pieces covered that we were here for today. I think it's super important, especially if people are showing up late, which is all too common nowadays.
By the way, regarding the showing up late, the demo that I was on last week, somebody showed up on the flip side, I did a demo with a company and the AE showed up late to the call, about 5 minutes late, 6 minutes late. It happens. Fine. I get it. But if you're dealing with like executive level VPs, etc., if you look at their calendar, it's like back to back to back to back. So 10 minutes late or 5 minutes late really chews into their time. And at that point, they don't even know if you're going to show up. My recommendation, this particular AE did this and it's not good. They're like, oh, sorry about that. You know how it is. It's like, I know how it is, but like be a little bit more sensitive. It would have been better if they said, I'm so sorry for being late. I know I apologize. I ran over. I apologize. Do you forgive me? Like something like that. Show a little bit more intention behind that apology versus just doing it very passively.
That's Excellent call out. One of my former sales leaders, Mark Costaglo, just posted an excellent post on LinkedIn about this. He's a CRO at a new company now, and he was late and he kind of blew it off and it didn't go well for him. So if you want to dig more into how to address being late, that's a great post to go.
I saw that post. Yeah, that was great. All right, set the objective and share the agenda. I think you may have a slide for this, Aaron, in a minute, but so let me tell you a story. Let me actually see if I can pick on somebody. Alex that just said thank you in the chat. You feel free to respond back or go off camera, whatever you prefer. But if you're invited to your best friend's wedding and you've never been to that new location that they sent you the address, what's your first thing that you do before you actually leave to the wedding? And anyone can jump in, or you can go off mute or wherever you want. Map it out. Yeah. Directions. Yeah. You plug in, if you're using Waze, you plug in the address into Waze, and Waze spits out a couple of things. It spits out the actual end location of where you're going. It tells you how long you're going to get there. It tells you when you should leave. It tells you traffic. It gives you everything you need to know. So setting the objective and agenda is pretty much your GPS for the call, but less for you, more for the prospect. They've never done a demo with you. They don't know where the demo is headed. But when you set an agenda and an objective, you're now sharing sort of the map with them. And the way to do that simply is, the objective is why you're there. That's why did you put the address into Waze? You're going to a wedding. That's the reason. So why are we on the demo? And again, we'll talk about this later, but if you're doing a disco demo combined, one of the ways you can do this is saying like, hey, Aaron, glad we're able to make it to today's call. The goal of today's call is to learn a little bit more about your challenges and see if outreach can help solve it. And if we can, great. And if we can't, that's fine. I'll be happy to recommend you somewhere else. And if we can't solve it, this is what we'll cover today. And then just share what you're going to cover.
Love it. Yeah. I wanted to share a couple really clear examples for you of slides I've actually used in the past and gotten great feedback on. I will say there is kind of a difference in my mind. I put my demos almost in two buckets, right? I put my everyday common demos where it's one or two people. It's usually middle level management. They're very important, but it's not my CRO, CEO level demo where I'm talking to people who are going to be signing this check. So when I kind of separate them out a little bit, I do two different things with my slides. With my everyday demos, I always set an agenda. I always talk about where we're going and why we're going there based off what I've learned from them in my discovery. But with the CRO, CEO level conversations, I have found, and I don't know if the rest of you feel this way, but lots of those folks are talkers and they like to talk about things that are big picture visionary things rather than sometimes specific to what we're actually there to cover on the demo. And so what I found is I can actually send out an agenda slide with an introduction of who's going to be on the call for those kind of higher, more important, if you will, CEO, CRO level demos so that we don't have to do all the introductions. Everybody knows who's who from the email, and we don't have to spend 10 minutes talking about, what you're here for today, what you want to get out of today's call. We did that all over email, and I find that really helps with time management too.
How do you verify if they've, so let's say you send out like this agenda email. How do you verify if they've viewed, let's say the agenda slide? Do you ask them, do you do like a PSA, please let me know if you have any, like what's the way you verify that? Well,
in previous roles, and sometimes in this role too, I use a tool like Seismic so that if they're looking at the slide, I can actually see what slide they're looking at. So you have it that will read that for you, that's super helpful. But if you don't, it's always best when you jump on the call to say, hey, I emailed out introductions and the agenda with the deck we're going to cover today. Wanted to make sure everybody was clear on what we're doing. If I need to run through it or cover it in further detail before we go in, let me know. And most of the time people say, no, we're good. We reviewed it. It's all good.
Cool. I think we have, that's interesting. I didn't know that Seismic does that, but I've been living under a rock. I think we have, I'm curious, what's your take on, and I know we spoke about this before, you and me, but like, what's your take on combining a discovery call with a demo or splitting it? What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's a hot take, probably for me, but I managed an inside sales team. We were prospecting. We were just doing discovery. So I live and breathe by discovery. And I think they need to be two separate things because I could spend 45 minutes on discovery alone. I truly, truly believe that similar to playing to your strengths and understanding what you're really good at as a seller and what you need your support team to help with, that's how I can piece through that when I've done good discovery. So if I've done really good discovery, I can understand, okay, I know strategy wise how these folks need to be putting together their plan of what they're going to be doing with my software, but I need my solution consultant or my solution engineer to come in and talk tactically about how that ties to whatever other software that they're using. And so I can do better prep with my SC because I've done the discovery beforehand. So I feel like I come in a little bit better prepared for those demos when I do the discovery beforehand. But I will say the caveat is always do discovery throughout the demo. The demo is not for you to just show features of your product. You're supposed to be learning as you're doing the demo. And we'll talk a lot about this with tie down questions as we get into the next slides. But you really want to make sure that you're still learning as you're showing them your product. How does this help with what their problems are? How do they see this working with their workflows right now? Those are all good things to learn while you're doing the demo. So I think it's kind of always be doing discovery. Instead of always be closing, always be doing discovery. That'll be
ABD.
Yep.
I have an interesting take, not to dive too much into it, but like I think it's interesting. If you go to a website right now, like if you go to most SaaS company websites, the call to action there is book a demo. Some of them have a request a demo, but the ones that have a book a demo, and then you click on that and you go to the calendar, it's only 15 minutes. You get on the call, it's like, oh, this is a discovery call. So there's a disconnect there. I agree. Prioritize discovery over demo, but I think there are certain cases where you can combine the disco and demo. The way I see a demo, at least the first demo, is like a trailer to a new movie that's coming out. It's sort of shorter, sweeter. It touches all the right points for you to say, hey, I want to go watch that. And that's how I think about demos. And so I like having demos on that discovery call. Again, if it's like enterprise or really strategic, sometimes even mid-market types of demos, then maybe not. I'll prioritize the discovery. But yeah, that's my 2 cents.
I agree. And I think quick hot take, we need to be selling the way that people want to buy nowadays.
Yeah.
It's really difficult to sell right now, and trying to fit our prospects into our box is not working anymore. So if they're coming and looking for a demo, we have to read the room and show them, that highlight reel, as you're mentioning. We can't just say, that's not how we do things, and they're going to go to our competitor. So I think reading the room is super important in all situations as a sales rep. Is you really want to make sure you're understanding how your buyer wants to buy.
Absolutely. And it's funny though, because the sales stages in companies is really more so internal sales stages, not like buyer sales stages, which would be an interesting. I'd wonder if any sales leader would flip that and start making the stages in their CRM to be buyer stages. All right, so our objective agenda, we talked about that. The next thing is you want to share what you already know. And I think we just talked about like disco or demo combination, but I'll tell you what happens a lot of times that I hear. Disco demo starts, or let's call it demo. It starts, and the AE will say something like, "Oh, so tell me about your business," or like, "How what do you do there?" And these questions are very obvious questions that piss off the prospect. They may not show it. They're in their head. They're like, all right, yeah, I mean, I do this, I do that. Like, it's not a way to build trust. The way to build trust is when someone, like, if someone like DMs me cold on LinkedIn or whatever it is and says, "Hey, Moore, I listened to your episode 371 on your podcast. I loved what you said about that." It's like, oh wow, like that's a cool DM, but like they clearly did their homework. I trust them. I'll respond to that because there's a level of trust. It may not be like I want to sell you my house trust or watch my kids trust, but enough for me to actually continue the conversation. So when you get on demos, tell the prospect what you already know about their business. Not the obvious, not like, "Oh, I saw you've been in business for 20 years, or I saw you're the VP of sales," or whatever it is. What I mean by that is connect the dots. So if you've done your research before and you went on LinkedIn and you saw that they are a VP of sales and you saw that they have like, I don't know, 10 AEs in the department and 5 SDRs, let's say, then call that out. Then say something like, "Oh, I see you have a decent sized team, 10 AEs, 5 SDRs. I would assume that the SDRs are probably doing a lot of the pre-qual for the AEs and passing that over." Like, connect the dots for them and share what you already know about their business, because they're going to think, "Wow, this person did their homework, saves me so much time. I trust them even more now."
Absolutely. I would say most of my demo decks are 3 slides. First slide is the agenda slide. Second slide, I literally call it what we've heard. And I put all of my discovery on that slide to run through with them. And then my third slide is what we'll kind of get into in a couple bullets here, but it's where I'm going to be going back and forth from the actual product to what I'm tying it down as far as a relief to their pain. So if you keep it simple, you really only need 3 slides. What are we going to talk about? Why are we talking about this? And how are we solving for your problems? One of the things I learned early in life that I think everybody needs to realize too is everyone learns in different ways. There are people who are visual learners, auditory learners, kinesthetic learners. And so when you put something up for somebody to read, though it is distracting and you do lose a little bit of the audio because people are reading rather than listening to you, you are letting somebody learn the way that they want to learn if they want to read off the slide. So I think it's super important to put some bullets up there as far as what you've heard so that people who want to read it can read it, people who want to listen to you explain it can do that, and then people who want to chime in afterwards can also give you some points on that. But Francis made a great comment, which I think is super important for this what we heard slide, which is run through it, right? You say, hey, Moore, we've noticed that you need to work on this, this, and this. This is how it works today. This is what you want it to be in a future state. Based off of this, what are you most excited to see today with our product? Because if there is one feature you are looking at, as Francis mentioned, we're going to wait all day for us to show you that. But when we get to that point, we can call it out and say, hey, Moore, here's the feature that you were looking for. This is what we're showing you right now. So it's good to tie it back again after you ask somebody what they're most excited about seeing today.
I would also, for that one, what are you most excited about our product or what you want to see today? I would also, after your, so correct me if I'm wrong, but you're essentially sharing the notes that you've taken from the previous discovery call right before the demo, and then you're asked that question, right?
Yep, exactly.
So what I would also recommend doing on top of what you just did is ask them what's missing from the picture. So for example, if I tell you right now, hey, Aaron, what's wrong with my headset? There may not be anything wrong, but just because that way I phrased that question, you're going to find something wrong with my headset. You may see something like, oh, well, maybe it's not adjusted correctly. And so when you're showing that slide and you're going over the discovery recap, call it, ask the prospect, what am I missing? And it's going to force them to think about potentially what other things they didn't think about that they didn't call out on the initial call. And it just provides you more context, because what happens is we don't ask this question, demo ends, prospect potentially went with another competitor, or they're stalling because they needed this other thing that they've never talked about. And so I find that helps prevent that situation.
Totally. I'm curious for everybody who's on the webinar, give us a 1 in the chat if this has ever happened to you. If you have had somebody join a demo without knowing anything about your product before, they were just asked to join the demo, and so they jumped in and you have to catch them up to speed while you're showing them the product. Yeah, happens all the time. So I think that what we heard slide is super important because you're catching anybody up who's not been involved in prior conversations. And it's really, really helpful for them to know why they're on that call. Because if they don't know why they're on that call, they're definitely not listening and they're not taking next steps from you. So get everybody on the same page. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd recommend, I would recommend, I don't know how many people check their calendars before the demo to see which attendees are there, but a lot of times, at least in my experience, the main point of contact that I was talking to added additional attendees. And because it's just like I have a ton of emails, archive, I would look at your calendars and see if there's anyone that's extra, and then just email the prospect in advance, say, hey, I noticed that you added so-and-so into the call. You know, what would they care about? That could be another one you can do. And then what I'd recommend as part of like your pre-demo email is asking, like adding a PS, like who else should we add to the call that you think would want to see this eventually, because a lot of times like, oh, well, I may have 2 other people later on if this is a fit. That's why I like to use that word eventually. All right. So we talked about share what you already know, find personal commonalities to build rapport. I think someone said it earlier, like ask them about their day. You could. I just find that like sort of like small talk. I went to the dentist today and the doctor was asking me like, hey, how's your week? It was good. And he's like, all right, enough of the small talk. And so weather talk, how was your day? I find that all, even like where you based out of, I find that all just small talk. There's a better way to build rapport. And one of the things I'd recommend is when you're doing research on your prospect, beyond just the business research, do research on something personal. So actually check their Instagram if they have one. Check their TikTok if they have them, their Twitter. A lot of times I do this when I check my prospects' Twitter. I see that they tweet stuff that they don't tweet or they don't post on LinkedIn, and it has more personality. And so I may jump on the call like, By the way, I noticed you tweeted that you took the kids for your 4 kids to a vacation to Colorado. How is that traveling with 3 kids or 4 kids? I have 3 kids of my own. I'm building rapport right then and there because I have some commonalities based on personal research, not just business research.
Absolutely. I also think it goes into playing with your strengths, right? If you are not one where small talk comes naturally, have some of your team members help you out with that because again, it's going to come off really disingenuous if you're pushing yourself to try to make connections with people. It is something you should learn as a salesperson and you should be getting good at with practice, but if there's somebody, on your team that you can lean on, always lean on somebody to help you so it feels natural and it doesn't feel like you're forced to ask these questions.
Well, it's like you said, right? Like you like to unblur your background. And that going back to your point, if the prospect's background is unblurred, you can call something out right then and there. Like just if you notice something that you can speak to, it's not forced. Like don't say like, oh, what is that? A bookshelf? I also have a bookshelf. Like don't say that. Say something that you can resonate with. Someone posted. Oh, it's you, Aaron. You said the magic wand question. Was it from Jeffrey? Like if you can wave a magic wand.
That's my favorite. One of my favorites. Yeah.
That's one of my like biggest pet peeve questions, actually.
Ah!
So I'll tell you what, I like where that question like stems from. It's essentially asking the prospect, tell me what you really, really want. And if we have it, you'll see you're like, wow, like, this is perfect. The reason why I don't like that question is because I've, in my experience, found that it shot me in the foot. It's like saying, hey, Moore, what if you could wave a magic wand, what house would you like? I will start describing Jeff Bezos' house. Like I'll describe a mansion, big mansion. The problem with that is when you're on a demo, you're like, oh, if you can wave a magic wand, what would you want? The prospect may start describing a rocket ship that you don't have. And you'll say something like, oh, well, we don't have that, but we have this. But what I like about that question, the intention of it is you're essentially trying to find out, hey, prospect, what's your criteria of what would make this a fit? That's really what you're asking, but you're using this other format of the question. So I just like to ask the question straight up, like the core, like, hey, Aaron, I know you're evaluating outreach, you're evaluating us, you're evaluating a few others. What are your like priority deciding factors that you need a software to have to make this a fit? What's your minimum criteria for this to be a home run? And then that question causes the prospect to tell you exactly what they need in order for this to be a win. And then you just show them, you demo essentially that. That's my whole rant on the magic wand question.
And I think it comes with a big caveat too. We're all in sales. We all probably are on LinkedIn. I don't know about the rest of y'all, but lately LinkedIn has felt like we have a lot of influencers who tell us what to do. And if you don't do it that way, it doesn't work. Moore and I got on our prep call for this webinar and we said, hey, we're going to have a healthy debate about things because everybody has their own way of doing things. And I want to just say, like, if it doesn't fit for you, don't do it. Again, be authentic to who you are. If it feels right and the question works for you, like stick with it. I'm still going to ask somebody that tomorrow morning and I'm going to chuckle when I do it because I'm going to think about you. But I think the reality is you're only good in sales if you're authentic and you're really good at what you do. And you're doing that because it's true to you. So just keep that in mind. We're giving you our tips and tricks, but you don't need to take them all as rules.
Test it. Always be testing. All right, where are we at? We're still on the checklist. All right. What I'd recommend also to build trust, and this happened to me Monday. So I got on a call with a company. I think they were called Copilot.ai. One of them, maybe Cleverly. I don't remember exactly which one. And on the call, it started, and the AE said, "Hey, Moore, I checked out your LinkedIn. We have a client exactly more like 90% of what you do, and they're using us, and they're seeing this." I was like, "Whoa, really?" Like off the bat, I was like, "Wow!" Like I'm leaning into that. So when you're pulling up case studies, make sure those case studies are contextual to the buyer persona and the problem that they're having. Ideally, if you've done like a really proper discovery in advance, then you can already prep for that. It's harder to do if you're combining your disco demo into one, unless you have very siloed use cases that you can just pull up from another screen. But having a similar case study and then use that as a personal, tell a story around that and make sure it resonates with the prospect. So that's another one that I've seen work really well to build trust within minutes.
Yep, I think it's critical if you are selling to your non ideal customer profile, ICP. I think if you are selling somebody that's not your typical customer, a customer story goes a long ways for somebody to understand what your product is going to do to help them.
I'm just looking at the time. I think I'm gonna speed through this and then we'll go. And then you have the agenda slide you want to show also. So I want to show them
Yep.
that. So I talked about this before, but you want to recap what you've learned from discovery. So if you're not splitting your disco and demos, put a 1 if you do a disco demo, and then put a 2 if you separate them in the chat. Curious. Depends. 2, 1. Okay. 1 and 2. Okay. So it depends. Yeah. So it's like cut down the middle. So if you do a disco demo in 1 call, then when I talk about recapping, is just literally recap it verbally and just take note as you're taking notes on the call. Just tell them, hey, so I'm taking notes here, Aaron, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is what I've gathered. And then just recap everything and then just stay quiet. If you're doing a disco demo separate, then you should have a slide that you can plug in afterwards with the challenges, their goals, and then share that in the beginning of the demo. And it'd say something like, Aaron, I took some notes from our last call, and then share your screen. This is what I've gathered. And then you go through the recap again. So either way you're recapping, the only difference is you're verbally recapping if you're combining the disco demo, and you're recapping it with a slide if you're doing a separate demo on its own. Which I'll show you what I have here. Pre-demo nurture. This is a big one. When you are scheduling a demo with whatever prospect you're talking to, don't wait for the demo to connect with that prospect. I'm saying connecting, like building any sort of relationship. Don't wait for after the demo to nurture them. Start doing that before. So what I do is if I have a demo, I'll connect on LinkedIn. I'll start engaging with their posts on LinkedIn. And then if there's a testimonial that I recently received that I think would resonate with that prospect because of the buyer persona and the use case, I will send them an email in advance before that demo. I'll say something like, looking forward to our call on Monday. By the way, we just had a client very similar to you that saw tremendous results. And I just plug it in right there. So nurture the prospect before the demo. Don't nurture the prospect only after the demo.
Love that. I had an SC I worked with a couple months ago. She was incredible, Elizabeth. And before every demo, she reached out to all the participants on LinkedIn, introduced herself, because I think too, as a buyer, it is a little intimidating to come onto a demo with new faces once you've talked to somebody, if you're doing your discovery and your demo separate. So introducing yourself, letting them know that you'll be on the demo if you're an SC or a manager or a leader, super helpful, because that's an easy way to break the ice.
Yeah. Someone asked your Carter asked, any differences in strategy between inbound versus outbound sourced ops? Carter, are you referring to discovery, or are you referring to, what are you referring to? We'll see. All right, if he responds back in time, then we'll jump in. I think the next slide is introducing before first call. Let's go back. Aaron, you want to take a stab at this? Any difference in strategy between inbound versus outbound sourced opportunities introduction before the first call?
Yep. Inbound leads are gold. So I treat them as if they are going to be my best friend. And I would absolutely reach out to somebody who's saying to you that they want a demo or they want pricing. I would, focus a little bit more on those people if you have the time. I know we're all kind of strapped for time with things, but if you're doing your demo and your discovery separate before a demo, I would always introduce myself regardless of where the opportunity came from, inbound or outbound. But if you're just going to do your demo and discovery in one call, I would prioritize somebody who came inbound. What are your thoughts more?
I definitely agree on that. And I think if we're talking about, like, let's just say building trust with an inbound or outbound opportunity, for an inbound opportunity, the trust is sort of already built. I think I forgot the exact study, but I think it was like 49% of buyers that came inbound already did a ton of research on your company. So the trust is already built with at least the company. And if you're doing outbound, there needs to be more trust being built, and that's why you should nurture them with testimonials in advance and engage on their LinkedIn. And regardless, you should engage and connect with them while you're prospecting with them. That's a way to build trust too. All right, so let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to share, Aaron, I know you have a slide also. If you want to, I'll share this and you share yours after, because I think it's within the same context. But this is a slide that I use and I teach my clients to use and the AEs to use when they are doing a disco and then a demo. And so after the discovery call, they go in here and they essentially pop in the notes from the call. So if you're using Gong, Chorus, whatever call recording software, the reason why I refer to that is because you want to put the challenges, the goals, and the timeline, not in your words, but in the prospect words. So if they said, hey, we're bleeding revenue because we'll use outreach, for example. We're bleeding revenue because our team it doesn't know how to properly follow up with leads, or with me, hey, we're bleeding money because our team can't close the leads that they have on the hook through demos, then I'm going to use those words. I'll say something like bleeding revenue. I'll use their words within this slide as well because that's what resonates with them. I won't change those words. And then I put in goals and then I put in their timeline. You'll notice it says the timeline itself, the date in which they're thinking of making a switch or they're going to move forward. But I also put in the reason for the timeline. And a lot of times that reason tends to change. Things get delayed. I have a client right now that their timeline, for some clients, their timeline for a prospect to go with their software depends on certain deals and contracts that's going to close. And so it's all contingent. And so if you're doing a demo as a demo for the first time, you can say something like, Aaron, last we spoke, you said your timeline was, May 1st, because that's when you plan on closing on a bunch of those new contracts. Has that been moved? Has that changed at all? And so I'm using this slide as a recap. And I also I'd recommend putting in the company logo. So your company logo, and then your prospect's company logo, and then the prospect's name recap. So outreach recap. I'll leave this here so you guys can take a screenshot of this, but I think there is a recording of this, but yeah.
I love it.
Aaron, you have a slide. I think that's pretty powerful. I think you have the ability to share, right?
Well, you just click to slide 7 and I'll talk through it. So I mentioned 3 slides that I show at the beginning of a demo. It's the agenda slide, the what we've heard slide, and then the slide I'm going to do a little tell, show, tell, which I'll explain later. I included the agenda slide on this, and then the tell, show, tell, I did not include the what we've heard. So if you want to see an example of what we've heard, shoot me a message on LinkedIn and I will send an example of one of those slides over to you. But like I said, I start with an agenda slide. So if I'm going to do introductions for this call, I had a lot of people on the call, so I didn't want to spend 10 minutes having everybody introduce themselves. I really just wanted it to be clear as far as who's on the call, put that at the top. Then I gave them a quick high-level overview of what we've heard, the 3 things we're really going to focus on for the demo, and then we're going to leave the last 10 minutes for the timeline review and next steps. I will say one of my weaknesses is time management. I'm a talker, if you haven't noticed that already. And one of my previous managers used to remind me, hey, shot clock, you got to do next steps. You have to leave time. And I think it's super important. One of the things we'll cover in our next engagement section is one of the things that I've learned is you can bring people onto your demos to kind of play man to man with some of the other titles. So you'll notice on the first section of this agenda slide, I had our SVP of Global Field Operations on the call because they brought their SVP of Operations. And I wanted the titles to be similar, and I wanted the departments that they manage to be similar, so that Harish could speak directly to John and tell him how he uses our product to help with his specific job. So I always am an advocate. If you have a sales manager from your prospect side, bring a sales manager from your side. If you have a marketing manager from the prospect side, bring a marketing manager from your side. It's always helpful for them to kind of talk shop together. I think that's super important with this, and that will also help just kind of break the ice. Because, it's very difficult if you're the only person on the call to be managing the chat, to be on the call, to be the face of the whole thing, talking technical, talking about your day and building rapport. One of the things you'll notice too is that when Moore's talking, I'm kind of monitoring the chat and vice versa. You need to tag team at least with one other person. So don't, as we've said, don't sell alone. That's super important.
I love I love the matching of the titles. Like, it's very subtle, but there's a lot of psychology behind it.
Absolutely. It really helps because as much as I think I know what an SVP of operations does, I do not live and breathe that way. So it's helpful for somebody else to talk through that. More, if you'll go to slide 9, that is the example of the tell, show, tell slide. So one of the other things I learned very quickly here at my time at Outreach was if you can tie back to the problem, it's super helpful. So on the left-hand side of the slide, I put the problem we're solving for. So in this case, it's helping company XYZ reach profitability by December of 2023. So the whole goal is this, and then the 3 bullets on the side, here's how we're going to help you get to your goal on the left. The 3 bullets on the side are super high level and again are in their language. So totally echo what Moore said. If they call their AEs something different than AEs, you better not call them AEs. You better call them the name that the team is called, because you are talking to them and their team. So make sure you understand their acronyms. Everyone calls an SDR something different than an MDR, a BDR, an XDR. So make sure you know what their verbiage is, because that's super, super important for them to tie it back mentally to what life is like at their company. Super quick, high level. They don't really know what I'm showing if they're looking at this slide, but once I slide to my other screen, show the product and come back to this, it'll tie it all together. And one quick tip for you, if you are a Mac user, if you use 3 fingers while you're sharing on a presentation, you can slide from one internet screen to another. So you can really easily kind of slide your PowerPoint over, get to your product, slide back to your PowerPoint. So that's kind of a seamless way to go back and forth. And it's helpful to come back to this slide when you tie down your questions, because they're not overwhelmed looking at your product. They're looking at this, you're saying, hey, we just talked about ease of use and adoption. More, how do you see outreach helping you with your adoption issue that you're seeing with your current SEP today?
So you're, as a recap, you're sending that agenda slide in advance, 24 hours in advance, and then this slide you're having ready on the demo. You'll probably start with this, then go back and forth between demo and slide.
Exactly. So I start with the agenda slide, then I do the what we heard slide, and then this is my 3rd slide where I'm getting into the actual demo itself.
Cool. This is awesome. I like the design.
Yeah.
All right, let's go back. How are we on time, by the way?
I think we should jump to slide 6 and finish up there if that's good with you. We have 10 minutes left.
All right.
I'm also monitoring the chat. So if anybody has pressing questions, shoot them in the chat and we'll make sure we get those covered.
All right. So we didn't cover slide 5, so we'll skip that for now, I guess. What do you think?
I think so. I think there's some good
cool.
stuff on this. Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about how to engage with multiple attendees on the demo. You start us off, and then I'll jump in a little in the middle.
Sure. So obviously, as Moore had mentioned, doing some research on your prospects before the call. One of the biggest things that's super helpful is to understand where they've worked previously. Have they worked at a company that is a customer of yours? Have they worked at a company that has evaluated your software in the past? Do they have any connections to what you're trying to sell them? That's number one, the most important thing to understand, but also just general understanding of who they are, what's important to them, what their title is, what are their value propositions within their role. All those things you should know before you get on the demo, because as someone said in the chat, you don't want to ask questions you can Google. So that's super important.
Yeah. And you already talked about the bring leaders to play man-to-man, so matching the titles with the leaders and then having them jump in. Also, you don't want to sell alone. So bullet 4, start with orientation. So when you have multiple attendees on the call, it happened to one of my AEs or one of clients' AEs yesterday. They got on the call. There were 4 or 5, 6 people on the call, and before they actually started the demo, they did what I call orientation. Ideally, you should do this some level of orientation before, and what that is just like school orientation. Hey, before we start, I'd like to go around the room and just better introduce ourselves and get to know what everyone cares about. Again, I say this with a caveat because you really should do your research before and then call it out, saying, hey, prior to this call, I did some research and I saw that Aaron, you're senior AE at Outreach, so and so, you do this. But if you don't do that, then you want to make sure that you're starting your demo with just getting everyone's role, and not only their role, but like what they care about. Like when you have a VP of sales on a demo and a CFO on a demo, the CFO doesn't really care about the sales stuff. They care about ROI. So asking maybe the CFO, I don't know how many CFOs actually sit on demos, but asking the other prospects on the call what matters in their world, and make a note of that. And on the demo, you're essentially going to go back and call it out throughout the demo. So like imagine you do a demo now, and Aaron mentioned to me, let's say Aaron is a VP of sales, and Aaron mentioned to me that what's really important is to have insight and reporting for her sales team. So during the demo, I may see something like, hey, Aaron, by the way, you mentioned earlier that you really care about having insights and reports around your sales team. And so I'm calling Aaron out because that's going to bring her in. If you notice, by the way, for everyone, while we're doing this webinar, Aaron and I were saying like, hey, put a 1, put a 2, screenshot this, pay attention to this. We're using these words because it creates engagement through the chat. And people do this on webinars. People that know how to do webinars do this. And Aaron and I did this throughout the call. Do that on your demos also. Hey, prospect, pay attention to this. This is really important because you mentioned X. Yeah, I'll let you chime in here.
Yeah, no, I want to double down. If you are going to ask what's important to them, you have to cover that, because it is not a good call to ask somebody what's important to them and then just breeze past it, because they will absolutely remember that. So be prepared when you ask people what's important to them, that you need to find a way to cover what is important to them, because they always want to know that you came back to it. So super important to make sure you do there. One piece of where the man-to-man play helps you a lot is, as Moore mentioned, we're calling out people's names, we're monitoring the chat, we're asking for engagement. This is where your man-to-man can tap in on the person that they're supposed to be playing with. So if you pause on reporting and visibility and you have an SVP of operations in your internal prep call with your SVP of operations internally, that's the time where you tell them, hey, if you see a lull, go ahead and ask John, that SVP of sales, what he thinks this is going to do to his business. And you can use your extra people on your side to ask those important questions directly to the people that it's going to impact. So use your team. I think that's the biggest point of this, is that you really can't do this alone, especially when there's multiple people on the call.
And you notice, Aaron and I just did it right now. I said, hey, Aaron, can you start this? I'll chime in. So we're communicating throughout the webinar demo, whatever you want to call it.
Totally. I think one thing, I know we have a couple questions in the chat. Tyler asked a great question as far as having multiple people from different departments on a call. I am a huge advocate of trying to break things up by department. So if I have a big deal and I am working marketing, sales development, AEs, operations, I'm going to try to do 4 different demos, because things that are important to marketing are not important to sales development and vice versa. So I'm really going to try to tailor to their department. Obviously, there are situations where you can't do that and you need to do everything in one setting, or you have kind of an executive high-level demo with multiple stakeholders from different departments. And in those cases, you just have to run with what you've got. But I would always encourage you to try to break it up if you have the time to do really tailored demos, because that's how you're going to build champions. And one other thing I want to say before I forget too, is if you did really good discovery and you broke up your discovery and your demo, that means you should be in the early stages of building a champion. And so if you hit it off really well with that person you did discovery with, ask them before the demo to speak up for you, because if they feel this product can help them with what they're doing, it's going to go a lot further if they say that on the demo in front of their colleagues, rather than you saying, hey, this can help you. Having the person who works there mention, this can really help with XYZ, that always goes a long way. So prep your champions too. If you have people that are really in your corner, use them to your advantage on the prospect side.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, you mentioned something about splitting or breaking this up by department. That also gives you a very good reason to set up next steps with intent. What I mean by that is, a lot of next steps are like, all right, should we put something on the calendar and circle back? But if you know that there are other departments that will have to see this and you won't be able to knock it out on that demo, that's a perfect excuse to say something like, hey, Aaron, given that your marketing department and your legal department will want to see this, why don't we do this? Let's put something on the calendar for marketing next week and legal for the following. Would 2 p.m. work? And so I'd like to set up next steps knowing that I don't have enough time. That's my excuse. I'll mention this real quick to create engagement throughout the call, especially with multiple attendees. If I want to call out on one of the attendees, one of the prospects that's on the call, or they're asking a question that's not necessarily what I'm showing on my screen, or we're having a discussion on what I just showed, but it's not on the screen. I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And what that does is it zeroes in the attention on your face and it creates engagement. Because when you have your screen open with your 20 tabs and your software and all that, they're distracted. They're not present. And so stop your screen share throughout the demo when you're talking about things that are not on the screen.
Totally agree. It goes back to, if you put something in front of someone, they're going to be distracted. So Kenny, to your question, to stop the screen sharing, it'll flash your screen a little differently as a participant. So it will allow you to kind of look back if you're distracted and you weren't paying attention. But also, if you're trying to have a conversation, like I love to stop sharing my screen at the end when I talk next steps, because I want to see everyone's face and I don't want to have a distraction between us when I'm asking them to get on another call. So always helps to stop sharing your screen when you want to talk about something more important.
Cool. And we're almost at time. We have one more slide. I don't think we'll be able to cover it. So I guess we should open up for questions unless we shouldn't show that slide, whatever everyone wants.
There was a good question from Paul that maybe we can cover in the last couple of minutes. He mentioned, how do you map out the story you're going to tell during your demo? Any insights on your process for prep? And I will say quickly, because Carter just asked an excellent question, so I want to get to that one too. But prep work, to me, always comes down to discovery. If you did really good discovery, you can come down. I would never do more than 3 things. 3 things is kind of the cap that the human brain can process and categorize things in. You can have subcategories in those 3, but the focus on 3 main categories you're going to solve for, or 3 areas you're going to help them with. And then I try to fit everything into those 3 categories, or a few things into those 3.
Yeah.
I'll let you go, and then I want to make sure we cover Carter's last question at the end too.
So on that point, when you are doing discovery and your prospect gives you a laundry list of all the problems that they're having and all the goals that they want, this part is really important. Make sure you're asking them to prioritize that. So when you're doing that recap, hey, so it seems like problem. Out of the 10 things that you mentioned, what's mission critical for you? What's number 1 on that list? And then get 2 and 3. And then that is, it's one of the slides we didn't cover, but those top 3 problems that they're having, that's on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being mission critical, you're going to prioritize the feature that solves that problem first. And then you're going to move on to the second feature that solves a secondary problem.
Absolutely. Lastly, Carter's question about thoughts on one email post demo follow-up or individualized emails after the demo follow-up. I have asked my managers and leaders this in every role I've been in, and I've gotten a different answer across the board. But the one I've landed on is, in the beginning, I talked about the 2 different buckets, my everyday demos where I'm talking to the middle level managers, and that's great. And then I have kind of my high-end demos with my C-levels and lots of stakeholders. With those high-end demos, I am always sending one-off follow-ups. I send one big follow-up after a demo, and then I send one-off follow-ups specific to certain people. And what I do in those one-off follow-ups is I call out something they mentioned on the demo. So if you're really good at asking questions, asking how this is going to impact engaging people, it gives you something to go back to in your follow-up email and say, hey, Moore, thanks for joining the demo. It was great to meet you. I know you mentioned outreach really can help you with your reporting and visibility. I'm looking forward to showing you more of that. Here's a screenshot I thought might help you. Let me know if you have any questions. Doesn't have to be long and crazy, but you're calling out something that they said specifically so that they feel important and that they were meant to be on that call. And I think that goes a long way. If you use Sendos too, I think it's good to shoot people a cup of coffee. If there were people that joined that you really want to get a connection to. So, it's all up to you, but it's all about connection because people buy from people they like.
Yeah. And the larger the deals, I would actually push for even a personal gift, like a customized gift, not to bribe or anything, but if there's something that really resonates, maybe your prospect just had a baby, whatever it is, get a onesie.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much, Aaron and Moore, for sharing so many fantastic tips here with us. We didn't get to all the slides, but we'll make sure that we include that deck in the post-event follow-up. That'll also have the recording. So be sure to reach out to Moore and Aaron if you'll have any more questions or post on Sales Hacker discussion. We'd love to keep the chatter going. But thank you all for tuning in live, and I look forward to hanging out with you all next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.